Yes, we have. Welcome, everybody. This is Planet Green Trees, episode 151. We're calling it the MMA 101, Part 1. I'll explain more about that later. Call number is 1-347-326-9626. This is, of course, Michigan's premier medical cannabis blog talk radio show. We talk about medical cannabis, cannabis reform, and a host of other issues interesting or bringing interest to our community. I'm your host, Michael Komorn. Also with me, sidebars Chad from the Birmingham Compassion Club. In the studio, helping to answer and take questions and give answers, our good friend David Rudoi from Rudoi Law, attorney and counsel.
Hello. Always happy to be here.
And, of course, we have Jamie Lowell, Third Coast Compassion Center, joining us as the producer. Jamie, welcome.
Hello.
I want everyone to be clear that if there's any comments, criticism on the production of the show, Jamie is the producer. Call him and complain to him. We've got a lot of exciting things happening tonight. I want to first talk about who is going to be and what is our show going to be about. First of all, I want to make a quick announcement. Our good friend John Targowski, friend, attorney, cannabis warrior, reform advocate. Good news from him. He's back home. The concerns of his condition being worse have been found to be that it is not, and we're anticipating a quick recovery from him. So our thoughts and prayers go out to John Targowski. Also, for tonight, calling in, special guest calling in, our another activist and warrior, Eric Van Dussen. Listed here as an activist extraordinaire and assistant to Attorney Jesse Williams, along with Attorney Jeff Hank, who's also leading the effort to decriminalize cannabis in Lansing. We're going to be hearing about Eric. Eric, of course, is beyond being an activist. He's participated in the filming of many of the most significant medical marijuana cases. And as a journalist, he's been reporting on them, more of a photojournalist. But I know anyone that is following the medical marijuana movement in any way in Michigan always appreciates Eric's quick to notify all of the recent opinions. I think it's we've all come to rely upon that, as Eric is here's a case from the Court of Appeals, here's a case from the Supreme Court. Also, Nick Agro will be calling to give us updates on the status of the clinical relief case. Many of you may recall this was one of the cases that first erupted out of Oakland County in August 2010, along with a case out of Waterford that I was involved in. This case, clinical relief, resulted in a dismissal. Case went to the Court of Appeals and was reversed, and now is back, and we're going to hear about Nick and what's going on with that. And also, his sweet mother, Barb Agro. It's been really like a symbol of heroism for our community. She went through one of the most just despicable processes in the criminal justice system where bad rulings, every bad ruling was made, and they created some other bad rulings that had never been made in the history of American jurisprudence, and they applied them to her case. And as it should have been Barb Agro's case, and we're talking about a 70, looks like 50 maybe, 70-year-old woman retired from Waterford, one of the police,
Lake Orion
dispatcher. You know, they raided her house. Her husband, that no one I've ever heard say a bad thing about, just a tremendous influence in the community, died 10 days or so after the incident. It was really something that has just been very profound to the medical cannabis community. I know everyone has interest in hearing how they are doing and when they're going to come back and lay it on them. Also, calling in from the court reporting, Steve Green from the Human Solution. This, of course, is the organization that has been following, keeping track of, and reporting on patients and caregivers who find themselves in court. Also, news, current events, and more. In the studio, as I said, David Rudoi, taking questions, giving answers. Spotlight tonight, Safer Lansing organization and campaign leader, attorney Jeff Hank, who's engineering the initiative. As you know, listeners, that last election cycle, 5 cities put in ballot initiatives into the election, and they were passed. This is the ongoing trend, as we all know. Cannabis and cannabis reform is the trending topic and supported by a majority of people in America. Jeff Hank is the leader of the Lansing effort. I'm going to do a rant in a little while. Also, we have Rick Thompson calling in. I understand he's not here to be able to make it. Jamie Lowell, as I said, Third Coast Compassion. And, of course, our sponsors tonight I want to mention quickly. Birmingham Compassion Club, Third Coast Compassion Center, Komorn Law, 1-800-656-3557. The Michigan Medical Marijuana Association, michiganmedicalmarijuana.org. I want to thank all the moderators who volunteer their time to keep a safe environment for the community to learn and evolve the conversation about medical cannabis. Shout out to our good friends Kevin Spitler and company at the Stamo, Michigan. I know Kevin is the Toledo, Ohio representative in the
Ohio Rights Group.
No Ohio Rights Group. I'm just kidding. And, of course, I want to give a shout out and a reference to our good friend at the Marijuana Ranch, who has been hosting and participating in a Cannabis Cultural Center. And they're hosting an event down on June 7th, which will be tomorrow, at 7 p.m. Want to get in contact and buy tickets and support Marijuana Rancher, call 1-313-422-5281. So, I'm going to rant a little bit right now, and my rant's going to be associated with what we're calling it. We want to do a little revisit. We know that at times the conversations in this very complex radio studio that we're participating in, sometimes assumes information, and we want to go back to the beginning. Thought it'd be a good time to intercede these various episodes, and we're going to start now with the MMA, Michigan Medical Marijuana Act 101, Part 1. So I want to talk about a little of the beginning, how things started, and a little intro teaser for you to come back and listen to other things as they develop. And we're going to try to do this for a couple weeks and break things down so there's almost like a history of some kind. All right, so what happened? How did this thing, why are we even talking about this? What happened? Well, there had been various voter initiative efforts. Many people don't know this, but 2004, Detroit, Ypsilanti, and Flint passed medical marijuana laws. They were initiatives, they were city ordinances, never used, but just existed on the books. There had been an attempt in 2006, I think, by the local community that failed, and then in 2008, with the help of the MPP, Marijuana Policy Project, and a lot of funds supported by George Soros and others, they were able to get the ballot initiative, or get a ballot regarding medical marijuana, get an initiative onto the ballot regarding medical marijuana. And prior to the election taking place, there was a lot of support for it, obviously, but there was a couple groups that were opposing it, one of which was led by, many often known within the community, but maybe not outside, a Citizens for, run by Bill Schuette. Bill Schuette was one of the biggest supporters. At the time, Bill Schuette was a Court of Appeals judge, but was one of the more outspoken individuals on behalf of this organization, which name escapes me right now, but openly, publicly opposing it. The initiative passed in November of 2008 by an overwhelming 63% vote. There wasn't one county in the state of Michigan that did not have a majority vote in favor of medical marijuana. And since that time, the arguments have been about what the voters intended. What was the law intended to mean? Who did the voters of Michigan have in mind when they passed this law? I guess the opponents would say, or that's what the discussion is about. But before you begin the discussion and begin the journey, it's important to know and understand specifically what the ballot initiative said, which I have in front of me right now, which specifically says that Proposal 08-1, as it appeared on the ballot in November of 2008, a legislative initiative to permit the use and cultivation of marijuana for specified medical conditions. The proposed law would, first paragraph, permit physician-approved use of marijuana by registered patients with debilitating medical conditions, including cancer, glaucoma, HIV, AIDS, hepatitis C, MS, and other conditions, as may be approved by the Department of Community Health. 2, permit registered individuals to grow limited amounts of marijuana for qualified patients in an enclosed, locked facility. 3, require Department of Community Health to establish an identification card system for patients qualified to use marijuana and individuals qualified to grow marijuana. 4. And of course, to me, the most compelling of all of it, saying so much about bypassing what the voters intended. 4, permit registered and unregistered patients and primary caregivers to assert medical reasons for using marijuana as a defense to any prosecution involving marijuana. I just find this so compelling because by passing this initiative and seeing this, voters clearly said that they believe that there should be a defense to any single prosecution involving marijuana if there's a medical reason, and that should be allowed. And speaking for a minute on that point, and I'll speak more of this in segments 2 and 3, but when I speak of this fourth paragraph of permitting a defense for registered and unregistered patients, people with cards and without cards, it means to me that the right to present a defense before a jury for individuals, whether they have a card or not. But instead of what happened after the enactment of the law, was you saw a concerted effort by the prosecutors across the state of Michigan to prevent patients or caregivers from being able to talk about, let alone present a medical marijuana defense to a jury. And this went on for many, many, many months until the Supreme Court finally ruled. But before we get to the legal aspects of it, I want to talk for a minute about these other topics. Then we're going to take a break and maybe open up the lines to some other things. But as we document these things now in the beginning, part 1, what were some of the observations of the first year? Well, I know that the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association served a big role at the beginning and still does, I would argue. But at the time, there was no real guidance. There was no real clarity. The individuals who had participated in much of the interactions with the legislature, with the development of the administrative rules, the people that were participating knew some of the nuances that took place in the discussions of what was going to take place, came up with a principle which is known as these compassion clubs. Compassion clubs were originally identified as groups that would provide information and provide education and speak as advocates for the community in various locations. And the MMA had designed a statewide original plan of having local compassion clubs that would be able to spread the gospel of medical marijuana, a number of resources, and they still exist on the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association, of how to conduct a compassion club, what to be looking for, what the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association was looking for, a sanctioned compassion club. And the idea being that it would be difficult for various patients throughout the state to really have any resources to meet caregivers, to even learn about growing. You know, the principles in the Act, the very core principles of patients and being able to grow their own medicine and caregivers growing are new concepts, and there needed to be education. And the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association provided that at a very accessible website that really took on the core principle of educating and representing and arguing on behalf of patients and caregivers' rights. And there were many, many compassion clubs. Some still exist in that mode. And I would just say for a brief minute, in complete and utter respect to my good friend Greg Francisco, some of the things that he identified as principles of how to conduct a compassion club and the things to talk about still ring true today. You know, and what I'm talking about are like talking points and how to discuss with opponents and how to neutralize discussions and how to speak about medical cannabis. While we all believe, many of us believe and want to believe and believe that it's still more to come about it, but I believe that there's a lot of, marijuana can be a cure, cannabis can be a cure-all for many different types of conditions, may even regulate health in some degree, but the community itself, the opponents may not be ready for that, and there was always concerns of not to discuss beyond just that it is a remedial, can treat conditions and assist in the treatment of other conditions. as just principles to kind of lay a groundwork of how it's going to be used, and without taking on the responsibility of being a physician and telling somebody not to. But anyways, those were some of the things that I observed. And the compassion clubs were very, very well run. There's a couple that still exist that were always very organized. I mean, I think of I can think of many that still exist today and have evolved into, Heidi in the downriver one I always thought was very. And I just remember always getting emails from them updating on when their meetings were, and seemed to be just a constant voice of talking out on MOCC. I mean, it goes on, and those are just the ones in the Oakland County and local area, Wayne County area that we're familiar with. But it goes on across the state. I know there's a ton that we hear about all the time in the Upper Peninsula that have really served as being educational centers of passing the information and providing resources and doing business and taking care of patients in private and function in that regard, creating networks, of course, and whatever that means and however that's done, but not doing it in the public setting. And, there was a significant moment I remember being where I was, and, when the news came that the Obama administration had taken its first public stand on what their approach was going to be. It was 2010, right, because that was the election. No, it wasn't 2008, but 2010 was the Holder Memorandum, which spoke specifically to the Obama's administration was not going to go after patients and caregivers that weren't compliant with state law.
2009, I believe.
2009. Nevertheless, the news, how it was applied from the medical cannabis community in Michigan, had a dramatic effect and dramatic change, and it seemed to suggest that if you're compliant with state law and whatever the activity was, the federal government wasn't going to bother with you. We found out that wasn't actually correct. Found it out in a lot of different ways, but my observation of the community of what happened is this was the opening up of the concept of taking what these compassion clubs existed of and what was going on in private and taking it to a more storefront, center, identifiable area that was engaging with patients and caregivers in public, and really with many with the good intentions of being transparent, that this was a philosophy of how to invite law enforcement and legislators and show how these different facilities could play a role in their communities, and many of them were received were received well. I think you hear of legislators that talk about them and saw the need for them in some locations. Some of them were resisted like the plague. One area was in Lansing where there seemed to be many. However, the backyard of our Attorney General created, he wanted to make that his place where he was going to be fighting with patients and caregivers and try to draw that activity into some kind of negative by its association in the community with churches or schools or what have you, resonating back to his same cries, same, prohibition kind of statements when he was opposing the law before it passed overwhelmingly by 63%. Children and schools and churches as the things we have to watch out for. But it's at this moment where I think there was a complete change in the community and focus of how law enforcement was going to be interacting with, who they were going to be interacting with amongst the medical cannabis community. What we saw at some point in time shortly thereafter, 2010, and this is the next marked area, is the original raids on dispensaries. One case that stands on my mind, of course, David Rudoi would probably join me. This is the Bob Redden case. It's been the first case in this timeline back in 2009, like right out of the gate, boom. Case gets dismissed a short while later, and boom, it's at the Court of Appeals, and it's getting all crazy. But the raids, I think, is the beginning of part two, which we're going to get to, the second section, and why that came about, the dispensaries. We've got the agros coming on tonight, and we can talk about how that got to that point and what happened. But, in this period that I'm talking about, the post-initiative and pre-raid period of time, the Attorney General at the time was Mike Cox. He was not taking a very active voice in where the act should go. He seemingly was quiet, not choosing to really take a position other than on the issue of privacy. He did issue one opinion relative to medical marijuana, where he took a very strong position on not having any possible leakage of patients' caregivers' information, and actually answered a query with his Attorney General opinion of the question of being able to subcontract out the Department of Community Health's processing of patient cards at the time, and he answered in the negative for the concerns of patients' privacy being leaked. So there's a lot more things that took place during this period of time, but I would tell you that the other observations was it was really a period of the unknowing. I mean, an unknowing in the sense that, I've read this law, I can't even tell you the number of times. At the end of the day, though, I'll tell you as I stand here today, when I read it then, back in 2008, 2009, it's not that different. The interpretation that I thought it was coming true in a lot of ways. It's everybody else, prosecutors and their narrow interpretations, and we're seeing that time and time again. And a lot of it revolves around that fourth paragraph, as I read from the ballot initiative. It seems to be the real, to me, the paradigm shift of acknowledging at least that any other marijuana behavior, if you're going to be in a trial, your only real defense is to either argue it's not mine or the police are lying. The permitting registered and unregistered patients and primary caregivers to assert medical reasons for using marijuana as a defense to any prosecution involving marijuana, the passing of that was really the most significant of all of this, I say, because for the first time ever in Michigan's history, a accused marijuana person who's engaged in some kind of behavior can give a reason or an explanation. And that is completely new, uncharted territory. But I'm going to wrap it up right there for right now. And when we come back from the break and some of the calls that come in will contribute to the part one period of time. And let me just try to redefine that a little bit. We're talking initiative and post-initiative 2, period of time pre-raids and arrests. What was the environment like? What was going on in Michigan? Do we remember? What were your thoughts? I mean, that's what we want to talk about a little bit tonight and get that discussion going. So you listen to Planet Green. The call number is 1-347-326-9626. Dial 1 to get on the air. And we are going to be right back.